Welcome to Theory 101. This is lesson number 1, major scales. Some background knowledge to be extremely successful with this lesson is A, you should be able to freely read treble and bass clef with minimal conscious effort, and B, you should understand the motions of half steps and whole steps. So some learning targets. What should you be able to do after this lesson? After this lesson, you should understand how to create a tetrachord on any given note, and you should also be able to understand the formula of a major scale and can build a major scale on any given note. So what is a tetrachord? Okay. A tetrachord is a series of 4 notes that has a certain pattern between them, and the notes must be in alphabetical order. So for example, the notes must be in alphabetical order as they move across, and they must follow the following interval series of wholes, whole step, and half step. So what will this look like? For example, if I choose to create a tetrachord starting, for example, on an A, I know that the 4 notes that I'm going to use are going to be A, some sort of B, some sort of C, and some sort of D. A, B, C, D, alphabetical. So now what I have to do is I have to ensure that the intervals between each note follow this whole, half situation. So between an A and a B, that is a whole step. Between a B and a C, unfortunately, that's just a half step. But it's supposed to be, according to our tetrachord formula, it is supposed to be a whole step. So how can I turn this interval from a half step to a whole step? I sharp the C. Last but not least, I need a half step between C sharp and D. That is a C. That is a half step. So there's our tetrachord. Again, 4 notes A, B, C, D, which are alphabetical, and follow this whole half situation. Again, if I were to continue on and do another example, let's say starting this time on F. So again, I need 4 notes. They must be alphabetical: F, G, A, and B, and they must follow this whole half situation. So let's just double check. F and G, that is a whole step. G and A, that is a whole step. A and B, that is a whole step. And it's supposed to be a half step. How can I create a half step instead of a whole step? I flat that B. So that is how we create a tetrachord. The next thing that we're going to discuss is how to make a major scale. All a major scale is going to be is 2 tetrachords linked together by a whole step. So how will that look? That will look like a whole step, half step, whole step, and then another tetrachord, whole step, half step. So when we see this musically, this is what we're looking at here. Again, we're going to have 2 tetrachords that are going to be linked together by that whole step. So if I'm going to build something, for example, on the tonic of D, I'm going to start on that D, and I'm going to build the notes for my first tetrachord. So alphabetically, D, E, F, and G. Then I am going to build my second tetrachord. A, B, C, and D. It's a really bad D. So there are my notes. I'm going to now apply my whole, whole, half. There's my first tetrachord. And then my second tetrachord, whole, whole, half. I'm going to link all that together by a whole step. So let's go ahead and apply accidentals. So D to E, whole step. E to F, that's a half step. I have to augment that interval by sharpening the F. F to G, that's a half step. We're all good there. G to A, that's a whole step. All good there. A to B, whole step. All good there. B to C, that's a whole step. I'm sorry, that's a half step, and we want that to be a whole step. So we're going to go ahead and apply a sharp to that C. And then finally, C to D with that half step. So something to keep in mind as you're moving is to make sure that you're doing so linearly. So, for example, in that last tetrachord situation, we had this whole half thing going on, okay? So D to E, whole step. This E to F, that is a half step. We must augment that and make it a whole step. Now, I understand that there are two ways that we can augment that interval to create a whole step. We could either do what we did before, what we did up here, and sharp that F, or we could flat the E. Flatting the E, moving from E flat to F, would create a whole step. However, that has now changed everything that goes on before. So we can't do that. That gets a frowny face, right? Instead, what we're going to have to do is, again, we have to continue moving linearly. We have to sharp that F. So another thing that you have to double check when you are working, let's look back at our completed major scale, is that we are moving in pure octaves. For example, it is a chromatic octave from D to D. All right, it must be a perfect octave. So a chromatic octave. It can't just be a diatonic octave. We'll talk about the differences between diatonic and chromatic intervals later. Basically, the idea is that a diatonic interval shares the same letter, whereas a chromatic octave has a certain number of half steps. Basically, what this means is I cannot move from D and then end on a D sharp, or from a D and end on a D flat. I have to move exactly from D to D. It has to be a perfect octave. So let's do one more example with a flat key signature this time. Let's do E flat. Okay. So again, you don't have to think of this as being two tetrachords. You can also think of this as just being 8 notes, one octave from E flat to E flat. So if I think of it that way, all I have to do is write out all of my notes from E to E. So E, F, G, A, B, C, D, and E. So now what I'm going to do again is just review, just to remind ourselves of our lovely little, oh, I've got just things all over this page, of our lovely little formula of whole, half, whole, half. I'm just going to apply that to this. Whole, half, whole, half. So now I just go through and double check those intervals. The interval between an E flat and an F is a whole step. It wants to be a whole step. There we go. The interval between an F and a G is a whole step. It wants to be a whole step. We're all good there. The interval between a G and an A is a whole step. It wants to be a half step. So how do I diminish that interval? I'm going to flat the A. Now we're on A flat. The distance between an A flat and a B is actually an augmented second, and we don't want that. We just want a whole step. So how do I diminish that interval? Again, I'm going to flat the that B flat. Now I'm on B flat, moving from B flat to C. Whole step. It's a whole step. We don't need to do anything. Between C and D, whole step. It is a whole step. We don't need to do anything. And then to finish off, we have a D to an E, which naturally is a whole step. We want a half step. We have to diminish that interval, which would give us an E flat. Again, to triple check ourselves from E flat to E flat. That's okay. It gets a happy face. All right. If it were to, again, end on E natural or E sharp, then we know we've made a boo-boo. Now that we've done all this, one more thing I want to show you, and I'm running out of paper, is the cool thing about understanding the major scale formula is that now I can create a major scale on any note, even notes that don't technically have a major key signature, which we'll talk about next time. For example, let's say that I'm working on G sharp tonic. There is no such thing as the key of G sharp. We use something else, and again, we'll talk about that later. But it's very interesting to see what a G sharp major scale would look like. So G sharp, again, I'm going to write all of my notes from G to G. G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay? And again, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. All right? So let's go ahead and apply our accidentals. Whole step from G sharp to A sharp. Whole step from A sharp to B sharp. Half step. This is technically an aural unison. We have to make that a C sharp. Whole step, C sharp to D sharp. Whole step, D sharp to E sharp. Whole step, again, here's another one of those aural unisons. E sharp and F are the same thing on aurally. We have to make it a half step, so it would be an F double sharp. And our half step from F double sharp to G sharp. So as you can see, there is no such thing as the key of G sharp, but it's interesting to see what that major scale looks like. So again, hope you have learned how to create a major scale. A good assignment for this would be to build all of the major scales in both treble and bass clefs to double check yourself. Next time we will be talking about key signatures and how major scales affect key signatures and how we build those. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time.